On the west bank of the Nile at Luxor, like a mysterious veil above the desert, rises a pyramid-shaped mountain. This is Dehenet, the great peak of the west, a sacred mountain that for millennia has guarded a majestic secret within its heart, the royal necropolis. Beware the western peak, for she does not forgive. The ancient Egyptians would warn those who might dare to plunder the royal tombs. This mountain was believed to be a protective goddess and was depicted as a cobra with a human face. She was said to punish violators harshly, for example, by blinding them. Yet at the same time, she protected the artists, craftsmen, and stonemasons who labored here, crafting the tombs beneath the blazing sun in extremely harsh conditions. These artisans held the official title, servants in the place of truth, but they called themselves Seshemset, people of the tomb. They lived in isolated settlement known as Set Ma'at, place of truth, later renamed by the Arabs Deir el-Medina. Don't let the desert silence of this valley deceive you. Once, this was a lively and thriving community. Here lived scribers, sculptors, painters, stonemasons, gilders, and many other skilled craftsmen with their families. This was the elite of society, for to work for the pharaoh was considered a great honor. They received everything they needed to live, could pass their position down through generations, had access to physicians, received gifts from the pharaoh, and were sometimes even rewarded for their service. Some of them had servants, and the wealthiest even owned slaves. They were highly respected and extremely valuable to the state. On average, about 65 families lived in this village. And though to us their houses may seem small and their streets narrow, for their time that was perfectly normal. Even today, if you visit any village, especially in Upper Egypt, you'll see the same picture. Houses pressed tightly together. This way of living was born in antiquity and endures to this day. Inside, however, the homes often astonished visitors with painted walls and the fact that their owners, educated and intelligent people, possessed large personal libraries filled with scrolls. However, this village had one significant drawback. It was surrounded by 2-meter-high wall, and the inhabitants were forbidden to leave it without permission. After all, they were the ones who knew all the secrets of royal tombs. The ancient Egyptians lived according to a decadal system, 9 working days and 1 day of rest. Every 10 days, a team of stonemasons, sculptors and scribes would gather their tools, water and provision and set out for the Valley of the Kings, located about 3 kilometers from their village. The team was divided into 2 groups. One worked on the left side of the tomb and the other on the right. Quite often, by the time the stonemasons had finished carving out the rock in the inner chambers, the walls in the first corridors were already decorated and the painters would begin their work. Interestingly, ordinary houses in ancient Egypt were built to be temporary, mostly from mud brick made of Nile silt. According to their beliefs, the time allotted to them on earth was brief and insignificant, but eternal life lasted for millions of years. Tombs, on the other hand, were constructed very differently, from durable materials or hewn directly into the rock, and were referred to as eternal dwelling. Enormous wealth was spent on their decoration and the cult objects within. What is particularly fascinating in that, while royal tombs were painted according to strict canons and rigid rules, the craftsmen could decorate their own tombs as they wished. These private tombs were filled with secular scenes, celebrations and festive banquets, floral motifs and lush gardens, Nile hunts and reed thickets, and depictions of countless animals and birds. In essence, the very same scenes ordinary Egyptians had desired in their tombs for millennia, since the age of the pyramids, were now rendered in a new artistic style. I can easily imagine how after 9 grueling days spent working on the pharaoh's tomb, these artisans would return home, and on their single day of rest they would take up their tools again, to work on their own tombs or on those of their neighbors. They helped one another, and they often received commissions from other nobles as well. These people were the Raphaels and Michelangelos of their time. Even among the workers of Deir el-Medina, life was not the same for everyone. Artists often lived longer, while stonemasons died young due to the lung problems, the result of constantly breathing limestone dust. And if you think the ancient craftsmen showed up to work every single day like clockwork, well, not exactly. Just like us today, there were valid excuses for taking a day off. It might be an important village festival, a family celebration, a birthday, or some trouble involving a close person. And no, it didn't even have to be a real relative. It was enough to swear that someone dear needed help and you'd be excused. Among the non-so-respectable excuses, the most common one was drinking. For absence like that, the worker was fined. Not with money, there wasn't any in Egypt, but by losing part of their rations. Food, oil, clothes, and the other essentials. Since the economy worked on a barter system, these rations were a paycheck. Sometimes after the fines, there was so little left that the family barely made it through the next 10 days. These people were cheerful and had a wonderful sense of humor. A huge number of ostraca, fragments of pottery or stone, have survived, covered with their scribbles, lists, little jokes, caricatures, and sketches of reliefs they'd later carved into royal tombs. One story tells of craftsman named Paneb, who had a real talent to driving everyone absolutely mad. He stole, harassed other men's wives, and constantly started fights. There is even evidence that once, while gloriously drunk, he sat inside the unfinished royal sarcophagus and threw lumps of clay at people passing by. When Paneb finally died, many craftsmen ordered servant statues with his face to their tombs, so that in the afterlife he'd have to work for them for all eternity. Another story is about a son writing to his father. The father has told him to watch the experienced craftsman at work, but the man spent the entire day looking for a water jar and achieved absolutely nothing. By sunset, both the man and the jar had disappeared. And then there is a letter from a son to his mother. "Send me some bread and whatever food you have as quickly as you can. May Amun bless you and reward you for all your good deeds. But seriously, send the food." Of course, between all the laughter and drama, there was a serious work to be done, and it had to be finished fast. Life was short, tombs were massive, and time was limited. Usually the first act of new pharaoh was to bury his predecessor, and the second was to start building his own tomb from the very first day of his reign. And while the rest of the country mourned the dead ruler, in Deir el-Medina the mood was quite the opposite. They were celebrating. For the craftsmen, it meant a new royal commission, steady income, and a comfortable life ahead. The ancient Egyptians cared not only for their own afterlife, but also, and perhaps even more so, for ensuring a proper eternal existence for their pharaoh. The king was not considered an ordinary mortal. He was believed to be the earthly embodiment of the god Horus, the intermediary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, combining human and divine nature in a single figure. His role was maintain cosmic balance and secure the prosperity of Egypt. The location of royal tombs in Valley of the Kings was chosen with a great intent. It was not merely because of the mountain that resembled a pyramid in shape. In fact, at first, a small pyramid was built above each tomb. However, the structures often served as beacons for tomb robbers. Beginning with the 18th dynasty, by order of Amenhotep III, pyramids were no longer built above royal burials, and the tombs themselves became hidden underground. Yet this valley was sacred long before the pharaohs came here. Within its gorge, the earliest rock carvings date back to the Neolithic era, long before the emergence of Egyptian civilization. These carvings are connected to the cult of Mother Goddess, who was venerated for millennia. According to ancient tradition, this place was believed to be her womb, the site where the world was born. It was also considered one of the great gateways to the afterlife, second in importance only to Abydos. In the Egyptian worldview, a royal tomb held profound meaning. It was not simply a final resting place, but a model of the cosmos, a kind of ritual machine. Every element of the tomb, from the structure itself to the sarcophagus and ritual objects placed inside, was designed to activate the transformation of the king into an eternal immortal spirit. For this reason, the royal tombs were increased with special funerary texts. These texts originated with the earliest pharaohs of the first dynasties and were at the first transmitted orally by priests, since the knowledge was considered sacred and forbidden to the common people. Later, they began to be carved exclusively on the walls of the royal tombs. Only on rare occasions were fragments of these texts found in the tombs of high officials close to the king, but such cases were exceptional. For ordinary people, there existed a different kind of text, a guide to the afterlife called Imheru, the Book of Going Forth by Day. Today it is widely known as the Book of the Dead. This was a true guidebook intended to help the soul navigate the perils of afterlife. If the person had lived a righteous life, they could stand before the court of truth, receive justification, and finally be reunited with their ancestors in the realm beyond. It was believed that if the soul failed to complete this journey, it would turn into a terrifying dark spirit, condemned to wander between worlds without even finding peace. This is why everyone longed to have a scroll containing these sacred texts. Owning such a book, however, was a privilege reserved for the wealthy. It was an extremely costly work on papyrus. Dozens of scribes and artists were involved in its creation, each responsible for a specific task. Some wrote the text, others drew the outlines, and still others added the colors. Alongside the luxurious scrolls, there were more affordable options, single-page versions. In fact, a person could choose any of the 190 known chapters, as the number of chapters determines the final price. Unlike the Book of the Dead, which guided the soul of an ordinary person through the afterlife, the royal funerary texts contained vast cosmic knowledge, the grand vision of the world of gods, spirits, and the universe. In this celestial realm, the pharaoh acted as a representative of all humankind. The ancient Egyptians referred to these texts as Amduat, that which is in the afterlife. But if such scrolls and texts existed, why were tombs still necessary? The reason is that the walls of the tombs themselves served as enormous unfolded scrolls on which the sacred texts were increased. The earliest tombs in the Valley of the Kings were even painted in color palettes that closely resembled papyrus scrolls. As centuries passed, artistic tastes evolved and tombs grew more elaborate, reaching the breathtaking decorative splendor that still captivates us today. For example, in the tomb of the Seti I. Every image in this space carried deep symbolic meaning. The starry sky, for instance, was called Ah by Egyptians. It was painted above the sarcophagus so that when the soul awakened, it would look upon the heavens and long not to linger, but to rise and join the ancestors beyond the celestial horizon. In the tomb of Ramesses VI, 12th century BC, the ceiling still reveals magnificent astronomical scenes that reflect the Egyptian understanding of the cosmos. On one side stands Nut, the goddess representing the sky of our world, and on the other, Naunet, the goddess of the sky in the underworld. In the west, Nut swallows the sun as it passed in the next world, and at dawn, the great mother of the heavens gives birth to the solar disk anew. The sacred texts of Amduat recount how, during the 12 hours of night, the sun god sails across the 12 regions of the afterlife on his solar bark, the boat of millions of years, to conquer death, be reborn, and rise again in the eastern horizon, young and full of strength. We are used to seeing that tombs have entrances. In reality, they do not. They have only exits. That is why the opening lines of the texts promising immortality are always found in the burial chamber near the pharaoh's sarcophagus and on the sarcophagus itself. From there, the inscriptions along the corridor walls gradually lead the soul of the deceased pharaoh towards the exit, so that it may break free from its stone dwelling and pass through the threshold into the next world, where it reunited with its ancestors and the gods among the northern constellations of the sky. On the walls, one can see depictions of numerous deities of the afterlife, with Osiris occupying the central place. The walls also show the various forms and transformations of the sun god during his nocturnal journey through the different regions of the underworld. The primordial goose, whose cry brings the universe into being, the red cat who defeats the serpent of chaos, and the classic image of the solar bark steered by the ram-headed night form of the sun god, accompanied by divine companions who aid him on his voyage. In the final hour of the journey, the sun god and his divine helpers defeat Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, thus beginning a new cycle of cosmic creation. The bark sails through the serpent's body, entering at the tail and emerging from the mouth, releasing the gods, now renewed, rejuvenated, and filled with power. They are ready to rule and to bring forth a new day. The burial chamber is the nucleus, the heart of the text. It is most often oval in shape, with the oval symbolizing eternity. And it mirrors the form of the cartouche, the elongate oval frame in which the king's name was written. Even quartzite sarcophagi and frequently shaped like cartouches, cradling the pharaoh's mummy within. Quartzite, called biat by the Egyptians, was chosen for sarcophagi for a reason. It was believed to be petrified sunlight, revered a small sun ruling on earth. The entire surface of the sarcophagus was covered with spells intended to grant the pharaoh eternal life. On inner side of the sarcophagus lid, the goddess Nut was often depicted, stretching out her protective arms to embarrass each departed king. In his journey aboard the solar bark, the Egyptian pharaoh held a place of great importance. He was the companion of the sun god in his nightly struggle against chaos. By reuniting with his honored ancestors, the pharaoh helped the sun god overcome chaos each day and restore the cosmic order. Beneath the protection of Mount Dehenet, within the Theban Necropolis, lie not only the tombs of kings. Behind every great pharaoh stood those known as the adornment of the king, women of beauty, presence, and often great wisdom, the royal wives. For them, as well as for many daughters and sons of the pharaoh who were not heir of the throne, a special burial ground was designated. It was located beside a cave that had long been a place of worship for the ancient mother goddess. In antiquity, this area was called Taset Neferu, the place of beauty. Today it's known as the Valley of the Queens. The royal women's residence was nothing like the Ottoman harem of later centuries. In fact, during stable times, there was no single building at all. Each royal wife had her own palace. It was a world of splendor and refinement, filled with the scenes of precious perfumes and luxury goods brought from distant lands. The pharaoh's wives were not always Egyptian. Often nobles, kings of neighboring states, and trading partners would send their most beautiful daughters to the Egyptian court for diplomatic reasons. All these women bore the title King's Ornament, symbolized by two gazelles on their headdresses. If a woman became the pharaoh's favorite, she was given the title Sole King's Ornament. Over time, after passing through various stages of rank, she might achieve the most prestigious title of all, Great Royal Wife, whose headdress was crowned with the royal cobra, the uraeus, symbol of divine kingship. As you may recall, the last prominent ruler of the New Kingdom and the Ramesside dynasty was Ramesses III, who reigned for 32 years. Yet most of his reign was spent fighting with invaders who repeatedly attacked Egypt while the country struggled through a deep economic crisis. The crisis became so severe that at one point the pharaoh could not even provide rations for the tomb builders of Deir el-Medina, leading to the first recorded workers' strike in history. The craftsmen stopped work, laid down their tools, sat in front of the royal palace and declared that they would not return until food supplies were restored. Their families were starving. Ramesses III was forced to meet their demands. Similar incidents occurred several more times before the Levantine invaders began to threaten Luxor directly. For security reasons, the workers were moved inside the palace walls, more precisely to the fortified mortuary temple of Ramesses III at Medinet Habu, where the pharaoh himself and his royal household resided at the time. As noted earlier, there was a deep conflict between Ramesses III and his wives, the causes of which remain unknown. What we do know is that Ramesses III despised them. This is evident even in the appearance of their tombs. It seems that the finest craftsmen were employed to work on the tombs of the pharaoh and his children, while the wives received only what was left. The tomb of his wife, Queen Titi, is notably smaller and more modestly decorated than the tombs of other queens of the 20th dynasty. It consists of only a single corridor and a burial chamber. One of the most intriguing features of Queen Titi's tomb is her depiction. In the burial chamber she appears as a young woman, her hair braided in the traditional youth lock. But as you walk through the corridor, she suddenly becomes a middle-aged woman, with makeup and dressed in more conservative attire. Considering that statues and reliefs were usually meant to capture a person's likeness, this sharp contrast between the youthful girl and the mature woman is striking. Such representations are rare in Egyptian art. We don't know exactly what role Queen Titi held at court, but we do know she was the mother of one of the pharaoh's younger sons, Prince Amun-her-khepeshef, named after the son of Ramesses the Great, whom Ramesses III deeply revered. It seems likely the pharaoh placed great hopes on this boy, since during his short life he was given some highly responsible positions. For example, he held the title of fan bearer on the king's right hand. It may sound amusing, but in reality this meant he belonged to the pharaoh's closest circle, and his role carried fan more weight than the title suggests. The prince also served as a royal scribe, a commander of cavalry, and was likely being prepared to become one of the top administrators of the state. Unfortunately, he died around the age of 15. His tomb lies close to that of Queen Titi. It can be called one of the most beautiful tombs of princes in the entire valley, even though it was looted in antiquity and later used for secondary burials. When archaeologists found it, it was literally packed with mummies. Originally, the tomb was meant for all children of Ramesses III, but at some point the plan changed, and it was dedicated solely to Amun-her-khepeshef. That's why all the reliefs show only him with his father, who, as an intermediary between gods and men, is depicted presenting his son to various deities of the afterlife. Yet no tomb, neither in the Valley of the Kings nor in the Valley of the Queens, can rival the beauty and preservation of the resting place of the woman whom Ramesses the Great himself called the one for whom the sun rises. This, of course, is his beloved wife, Queen Nefertari, her name meaning the most beautiful. After visiting her tomb, all others seem grey and unimpressive. The preservation of the colors and the quality of the reliefs is simply breathtaking. Most likely, this legendary beauty was the granddaughter of Ea, the high priest under Tutankhamun, who briefly ascended the Egyptian throne after the young king's death. Seti I arranged this marriage for his son for political reasons, to reconcile the legacy of the Amarna period of the reformer Akhenaten with the ruling dynasty of the time. And he was not mistaken. Among all the wives and concubines, this woman became the most beloved. This is clearly reflected in her tomb, which has become the central legend of the necropolis. The structure consists of 3 sections. In the upper chamber, the queen's journey to the afterlife begins. She passes through a state of transformation and descends into the depths of the underworld. Her burial chamber with a sarcophagus symbolizes the hall of the two truths, where the judgment of souls take place. Justified before the gods as one who performed only righteous deeds, the queen sheds her moral shell and moves onward. In the side chamber near the entrance, her soul encounters ancient deities and emerges from the tomb into the light of day as a purified being, a radiant spirit, an Ah. Despite the canonical structure of these funerary texts and images, many pharaohs, their wives, children and high officials, who were granted the exceptional honor of being buried in the sacred place, often departed from strict rules. Alongside the traditional scenes and inscriptions from the Book of the Dead or the Amduat, we can also see their own likenesses breaking through the imagery, asserting their individuality. We must remember that these were not just titles: pharaoh, great royal wife, heir. They were people with their own desires, dreams, ambitions and passions, but also with an unshakable faith that their life in the next world would last for millions of years. That is why they invested such immense effort, time and resources into their transformational machines, their tombs. All that remains for us is to marvel at the splendor of that era and the unwavering faith of those who devoted their lives to one great purpose: the prosperity of the Egyptian state.